The wind howling through the canyons of downtown Chicago usually felt like a familiar lullaby, but on this Christmas Eve, it sounded like a funeral dirge. I stood in my kitchen in Lincoln Park, the scent of slow-roasted turkey and cinnamon filling the air, a meal I had perfected over 40 years of marriage. The table was set with heirloom cloth and fine china we used for sacred gatherings. I was 62 and believed I had reached peace. Richard entered at 7 p.m., but he didn't take off his coat or his shoes, a ritual he had followed for 4 decades. He stood in the doorway, looking at me with eyes that were suddenly those of a complete stranger. "Sophia, we need to talk," he said, and the coldness in his voice made my blood turn to ice. I wiped my hands on my apron, the one my daughter gave me, and offered him coffee, trying to cling to our normal life. "I can't do this anymore," he said, staring at the floor we had chosen together 10 years ago. "I'm not happy, Sophia. I feel trapped. I feel old." I reminded him that we were 60, that it was natural to feel the weight of time, but he just shook his head. Then came the words that shattered my soul. "I met someone. Her name is Jennifer. She's 29, and she makes me feel like I'm actually alive again." 29, the same age as our youngest daughter. He told me they had been together for 6 months of lies, shared meals, and nights spent in our bed while he dreamed of her. Jennifer had given him an ultimatum. She wouldn't spend another New Year's Eve waiting for a man who wasn't hers. And so, on the night meant for family and rebirth, Richard chose to leave a 40-year marriage for a fantasy. He moved with a brutal efficiency, dragging suitcases packed with 40 years of a shared life across the hardwood. He said I could keep the house, as if a pile of bricks and mortar could compensate for a discarded heart. He promised to talk to our 3 children after the holidays, not wanting to ruin their Christmas, while he walked out into the snow, leaving mine in ashes. The door clicked shut, ending my world. I stood in the silent house, the timer on the oven beeping for a dinner that would never be eaten. I didn't cry then. I moved mechanically, turning off the heat, looking at the decorations I had spent a week putting up. I took off my apron and let it fall to the floor. I grabbed my thickest brown wool coat, the one Richard said made me look old, and walked out into the freezing Chicago night without a destination. I walked until my feet were numb, passing houses glowing with festive lights and the shadows of happy families. I couldn't call my children. They were in other cities, and I couldn't bear to be the reason their joy turned to pity. I ended up in Grant Park, sitting on a frozen metal bench near the fountain where Richard and I used to take the kids. I sat as the snow covered me, feeling totally invisible. For 40 years, I was Richard's wife or the kids' mother. I realized I had no idea who Sophia was. I had lived my life as a supporting character in someone else's play, and now the leading man had left the stage. I was so lost in the hollow ache of my chest that I almost didn't hear the irregular footsteps in the snow. A young man was approaching, walking slowly through the dark and empty park. He looked to be about 30, tall and thin, with dark hair and a shadow of a beard. He wore only jeans and a thin shirt, far too light for a Chicago winter. He was trembling violently, his jaw clicking with the cold. My maternal instinct, sharpened by decades of care, overrode my own despair. I forgot my broken marriage for a moment. I only saw a human being who was clearly freezing to death. "Young man," I called out, my voice raspy. He stopped, looking surprised to see anyone else in the blizzard. He told me he was looking for a place to get warm, but the shelters were full. Everyone wants to be charitable on Christmas, but space is limited. He had lost his job and his apartment months ago, and everything he owned had been stolen. He had nothing but the thin, wet clothes on his back. Without a second thought, I stood up and began unbuttoning my thick wool coat. "Take this," I said, handing it to him. He looked at me as if I were insane, telling me I would freeze, but I lied and told him I had plenty of layers underneath. I told him he needed it more, that he would be out all night while I was heading home soon. "It's Christmas," I insisted. "Let me do one good thing today." He took the coat, and I saw the instant relief as the warmth wrapped around him. He asked why I would do this for a stranger. I told him that I had learned tonight that the worst things can happen without warning. And if I could stop one bad thing from happening to him, I would. I gave him my scarf too, and he looked at me with an intensity that made me feel seen for the first time in many years. "My name is Matthew," he said, "and you just saved my life." He told me I was extraordinary. As he disappeared into the snow, I stood there in my thin blouse, the wind cutting through me like ice knives. But for the first time that night, I felt purpose instead of just pain. I had mattered to someone. I began the long, agonizing walk back to my empty house, shivering violently but feeling resolute. When I finally opened the door, the warmth of the house felt like a physical shock. I went straight to the bathroom and let the hot water wash away the ice and the memories of the park. I stayed until the water turned cold. Looking at the Christmas dinner, I felt a wave of nausea. I threw it all away: the turkey, the side dishes, the history. I packed the decorations into boxes, wanting to erase the night. I lay in our bed, the side that used to be Richard's, feeling like a cold void. I cried until I had no tears left, mourning the woman I had been. The next few days passed in a blur of silence. I ignored my children's calls, sending messages about a flu to keep them away. I spent days in my pajamas, watching the snow fall outside my window, wondering if my life was truly over at 62 years of age. On December 27th, I finally answered my daughter Paulina's call. When she asked about my flu, the truth finally spilled out at me. I told her about the betrayal, about Jennifer, and about the end of my marriage. She cried with me, offering to fly home immediately. I told her no, that she should stay with her family for the new year. I told her I would be fine, though I had no idea if that was true. My sons, Javier and Andres, reacted with fury and confusion. They both offered to come, but I gave them the same answer. I needed to face this alone. I was trying to find the energy to shower on December 28th when I heard a strange sound outside. It was the sound of many high-performance engines. I peered through the curtains and saw a fleet of identical black luxury SUVs lining my quiet street. There were 10 of them, parked with military precision along the curb. Men in dark suits stepped out, standing like a guard of honor. I panicked, thinking something had happened to my children or that the police were here with bad news. Then, from the middle car, a man stepped out. He wore a tailored suit that cost more than my car, his hair perfect and his beard neatly trimmed. It was Matthew. He walked straight to my door and rang the bell. My heart raced as I opened it. "Sophia," he said with a warm, genuine smile. "What a relief to find you here." I pointed at the CUVs and the suited men, my voice trembling with disbelief. He asked to come in, saying he had much to explain. I let him in, suddenly aware of my messy hair and pajamas, but he didn't seem to care about my appearance. Matthew sat in my living room and revealed his full name, Matthew Rangel. He was the CEO of Rangel Developments, one of the largest construction firms in the country. I had seen his face in the business news. He explained that the part about his parents dying was true, and that he had inherited the empire at 23. But he had been surrounded by people who only wanted his money. 6 months ago, he discovered his fiancée was having an affair with his best friend. They were planning to marry him just to steal his assets. The betrayal left him in a crisis, questioning if anyone in the world was actually sincere. He decided to conduct a test, dressing as a homeless man to see how people treated those with nothing to offer. He had spent 3 months doing this periodically. Most people ignored him or were cruelly dismissive. Some threw coins without looking at his face. "But you were different, Sophia," he said, looking at me directly. "You were clearly in pain yourself, yet you chose to help a stranger." He pulled my brown wool coat from his bag, now cleaned and restored to looking brand new. But he hadn't come back just to return a piece of clothing. Matthew explained that his company had a philanthropic arm, the Rangel Institute, which donated millions to community causes. Currently, it was run by finance experts who only looked at spreadsheets and were disconnected from the people they served. He needed someone with a heart, someone who understood empathy and sacrifice. He offered me the position of Director of Community Relations. The salary he mentioned was more than Richard and I had ever made together. I was stunned. I told him I had been a secretary my whole life and had no experience managing millions. He told me that technical skills can be taught, but character cannot. "You chose to help when it cost you something," he said. "That is the leadership I need." He told me I was extraordinary. Tears ran down my face as I realized it had been so long since anyone had seen me that way. Matthew gave me his card and told me to think about it. He said that even if I said no, that night in the park had restored his faith in humanity. After he left, I stood by the window with his card and my restored coat. My life had been destroyed 3 days ago, and now a door had opened to a new world. I spent 3 days on an emotional roller coaster. 1 hour I was convinced I should accept, the next I was sure I would fail. I was 62 after all. But then I thought about that night in the park and how helping someone had given me a brief sense of purpose. Matthew and I were both broken in different ways, and we had found hope in each other. I decided I wanted to be more than a discarded wife. On the 3rd day, Richard called. He sounded tired and asked to talk. I agreed to meet him at a public cafe. He looked terrible, shabby clothes, deep circles under his eyes, and an unkempt beard. He confessed that he had made a terrible mistake. Jennifer had dumped him 2 days after Christmas, calling him old and boring because he complained about his back. Richard wanted to come home to his predictable and comfortable life. I looked at him and felt a deep sadness, not satisfaction. "You threw me away like an old garment that didn't fit anymore," I said firmly. "And now that the new clothes are uncomfortable, you want the old ones back." I told him I didn't want that life anymore. I realized I had stopped growing while being just his wife. I told him I had received a job offer for an important role with massive responsibility. Richard scoffed, asking who would give such a position to a woman of my age. I looked him in the eye and told him that the person who offered it actually sees me. He values my character and life experience. I thanked him for leaving me, because without that betrayal, I never would have found my true self. I walked out of the cafe feeling powerful and in control. I called Matthew immediately and told him my answer was yes. He was thrilled and asked when I could start. "Tomorrow," I said, my voice steady. There was no reason to wait. After 40 years of being in the background, I was finally ready to step into the light and pursue something that was mine. My first day at Rangel Developments was a mix of terror and pure excitement. The headquarters were in a gleaming glass tower in the financial district. I was given a tour of the institute and met the team of 10 professionals who managed everything. I could see the skepticism in their eyes as they looked at a 62-year-old woman with no experience. But Matthew took me to lunch and shared his vision. He wanted me to go into the field and talk to the communities we were supposed to be helping. He wanted me to challenge the status quo and improve every program. As I reviewed the current projects, I noticed they were all dry statistics and numbers. There was no humanity in the reports. I told Matthew we needed to see these programs with our own eyes to understand if they actually worked. We visited a vocational training center in a humble part of the city the next day. The facilities were clean, but the students told us a different story. They couldn't get jobs because companies wanted experience they didn't have. Also, the center closed at 5 p.m., meaning people working low-wage jobs couldn't attend classes. We spent hours listening to their real struggles and needs. Matthew looked at me with admiration as we drove back. "You've been here 3 days and you're already revolutionizing how we do things," he said. We began changing everything, expanding hours, creating partnerships with employers, and redesigning housing projects to actually fit the needs of large families. I was thriving in a way I never thought possible, waking up every day with a clear purpose. Richard tried to call me many times, but I ignored him. When I finally answered, I told him there was nothing left to discuss. He said he still loved me, but I asked how he could love someone he discarded so easily. I told him he had set me free. I realized that if he hadn't left, I never would have discovered my own strength or found this mission. I was never going back to that life. My daughter Paulina was proud of my transformation, noting that I looked younger and happier than I had in years. She was right. My eyes sparkled and my posture was straight. 3 months later, Matthew called me into a meeting with the board of directors. I was nervous, wondering if my radical changes had upset someone important. Instead, a specialist on the board praised my work. They told me the effectiveness of our programs had increased by 40% in just 3 months. The board was so impressed that they wanted to double the institute's budget to 160 million pesos. Matthew asked me to lead the expansion as the executive director. 6 months ago, I was a discarded wife on a park bench. Now I was leading one of the nation's largest philanthropic organizations. I took a moment in the restroom to look at my reflection, my heart racing with both fear and excitement. I thought of the Sophia on that frozen bench and wanted to tell her that the end of one chapter is just the beginning of a better one. I returned to the room and said yes. Matthew hugged me and said he knew I wouldn't reject the challenge. We immediately began hiring more staff. We hired young people from the varied communities we helped, ensuring their voices were part of the solution. We created a revolutionary microcredit program for small entrepreneurs, focusing on dignity rather than just charity. I told the board that we wanted to give people tools to build their own lives, not make them dependent on us. The program was a massive success, with an 85% success rate. Every success story, the seamstress opening her shop, the teacher starting a tutoring school, gave me the energy to do more. During the launch of our 5th community center, I was giving a speech about second chances when I saw a familiar face in the crowd, Richard. My heart jumped, but I kept speaking. He looked older and tired. Afterward, he approached me and told me I was incredible. "I'm not the Sophia you knew," I told him simply. "She died on Christmas Eve." He admitted he had been an idiot to throw away the best thing he had for a fantasy. I thanked him again, because without his choice, I never would have discovered the power I had inside me. I told him I was happier now than I had ever been, and that the door to our past was closed permanently. Richard finally understood that there was no way back. Matthew appeared by my side as Richard left. "Everything okay?" he asked. "More than okay," I replied with a smile. Richard was my past, but this work and this new life were my future. A year after that fateful Christmas Eve, I stood on a stage in front of hundreds of people to launch our national microcredit initiative. I looked out and saw my 3 children in the front row, smiling with pride. I saw the entrepreneurs whose lives we had touched. Matthew was beside me, no longer just as a boss, but as a partner in this mission. I spoke about how FINIA are often beginnings in disguise. I told them how a year ago I thought my life was over, but a simple choice to help a stranger changed everything. I told the audience that kindness is not weakness, and compassion is strength. I explained that our institute is about dignity and seeing potential where others see problems. I finished my speech to a standing ovation, tears of joy and realization running down my face. During the reception, a young woman approached me nervously. It was Jennifer, the waitress Richard had left me for. She had come to apologize. She said she had convinced herself that being the other woman didn't matter, but after leaving Richard, she realized how much she had hurt me. I looked at her and realized I felt no resentment. She was irrelevant to the person I had become. "You're forgiven," I said. "Honestly, you did me a favor." Without you, I never would have found this life." Matthew approached after she left. I told him I was grateful for everything that led me to this moment. He stayed silent for a moment before asking me if I would have dinner with him, not as colleagues, but as something more. My heart raced. I mentioned our age difference, but he didn't care. He said I had saved him spiritually and he had fallen in love with who I am. Tears filled my eyes as I agreed to dinner. We were two people who had met on the worst night of our lives and helped each other grow into something new. 2 years later, we would marry in a beautiful garden, my children eventually supporting the union. At the wedding, there was a photo of my old brown wool coat, the catalyst for everything. I learned that you are never too old to learn to fly. The city of Chicago continued to pulse around me, but its rhythm no longer intimidated me. I had found my own tempo. My children now looked to me as an inspiration, not a person to be pitied. I had built a legacy of dignity, helping thousands find their own strength. I realized that the invisible woman on the bench was a powerhouse waiting to be awakened by a single act of kindness. Every morning, I look at the Chicago skyline from my new office and remember the frozen park. I keep a small piece of the heirloom red cloth on my desk to remind me of where I came from. It grounds me as I manage multi-million-dollar budgets and community programs. I am no longer Richard's wife or just a mother. I am Sophia, a woman who reclaimed her value and reshaped her destiny. Matthew and I often walk through Grant Park together in the winter, but now we are wrapped in warmth and love. We pass the bench where we first met and smile. It is our sacred spot. He still tells me I'm extraordinary, and for the first time in my life, I actually believe him. I have learned that love should never be a cage or a routine. It should be a partnership that encourages you to soar. I've started a mentorship program for women over 50 who want to re-enter the workforce. I tell them my story of the Christmas Eve betrayal and the park bench. I see the spark of hope in their eyes as they realize it is never too late to reinvent themselves. We are not old or discarded. We are experienced, wise, and capable of leading empires. We are the silent strength of the city. Richard eventually moved to a small apartment in the suburbs. We are civil now for the sake of the children, but the intimacy is gone. He watches my television interviews with a mix of regret and awe. He once told our son Javier that he never truly knew the woman he was married to for 40 years. It's true. I didn't even know her myself until I was forced to survive the cold. Jennifer stayed in the city, working her way up in the restaurant industry. I sometimes see her at community events and we exchange a polite nod. I truly hold no malice toward her. She was a symptom of a marriage that had stopped breathing, not the cause of its death. In a strange way, her ultimatum was the greatest gift I ever received, forcing the truth into the light. The Rangel Institute has become a global model for social development. We have expanded into 5 other major cities, applying the same principles of field research and community empowerment. Matthew and I travel frequently to oversee these new branches, always looking for stories rather than just data. Our team now consists of over 100 people who share our passion for genuine impact. I still have the old brown wool coat in a special cedar chest. I touch it occasionally to feel the coarse texture of the wool. It is a relic of the night I chose a stranger over my own comfort. It reminds me that our most significant moments often come in our darkest hours. That coat didn't just warm Matthew. It ignited a fire in me that will never be extinguished. My sons Javier and Andres have both adopted our microcredit model in their own business ventures. They've learned that profitability and social responsibility are not mutually exclusive. They respect me as a business leader now, often asking for my advice on community engagement. Our family has been rebuilt on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect, which is far stronger than the routine we once had. Matthew's faith in people is fully restored. He is no longer the paranoid CEO who felt he had to hide his identity. He leads with openness and vulnerability, inspired by the ordinary woman he met in the snow. Together, We have created a life that is rich in purpose and authentic connection. He is the partner I never knew I deserved, and I am the woman he was searching for. On the second anniversary of our wedding, we returned to the Alameda Park in Toluca, where the original story began. We sat on the same bench, now replaced with a new one we donated to the city. There is a small plaque on it that reads, "To the extraordinary acts of kindness that change the world." We sat in silence, watching the children play, grateful for the blizzard that brought us together. I am 65 now, and I have never felt more alive. My days are full of meetings, travel, and laughter. I have a husband who adores me and a mission that fulfills me. I am Sophia Miller Rangel, a survivor of betrayal and a champion of dignity. I know that the future is bright because I am the one holding the torch. I am no longer a discarded antique. I am a masterpiece in progress. Final thought, to every woman who feels like her life is over after a betrayal, it is just the beginning. Don't be afraid of the cold or the silence. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover that you are actually the owner of the world. Stand tall, give your coat to a stranger, and watch how the universe rewards your courage. I am Sophia, and I am finally, truly free. Goodbye for now.